Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Theresa Remick, and I'm the Managing Director of the Page Theater at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. Thanks so much for your patience. We're having just a little bit of difficulty today connecting with India, but how wonderful it is that we're even able to connect with India during these trying times to bring you an event like this today. We're really excited to bring you this presentation about the music from the show Speak. It's a collaboration of Leela Dance Collective along with Michelle Dorrance and Dormisha, two amazing tap artists. And then today we have the composers from the show, Carmen Staaf, who is an American jazz pianist and composer, as well as Jayanta Banerjee, who is a musician from India who is specializing in the Hindustani music that we see in the show. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank our sponsors. This activity is made possible for all of us thanks to the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We also have additional support for all of our Page Series community programs through the Excel Energy Foundation. At the end of today's event, we will be posting a link to a brief survey, and we would love to get your feedback about how the experience was for you. This helps us report back to our funders so that we can continue bringing you events, whether in person or online, as we look to the future and as we help to show the value of these funds throughout the state of Minnesota and beyond. If you enjoyed today's talk, we also encourage you to visit us at Facebook. We are Page Theater if you're watching on YouTube. You can also find information at pagetheater.org. We have many more events featuring Leela Dance Collective, Michelle and Dormisha next week and running through May 1st. Finally, before we turn it over to the guest for today, I'm going to show you just a brief video to get you acquainted with the production of Speak. And then on the other side of the video, we'll be joined by Carmen Staaf and Rina Mehta to get our conversation started.
Hi, everyone. Namaskar. My name is Rina Mehta, and I'm here with Carmen Staaf, and we're super excited to be having this conversation, and we're hoping that Jayanta Banerjee is going to be able to join us at any minute from India. So I am very, very excited to be having this conversation. One of my favorite things about this show is, in fact, the music. And it's been a real gift for me to have watched the musicians on both sides work together, collaborate to create the musical score. And I wanted to actually start today's conversation with asking Carmen, and when Jayanta joins, a little bit about your approach to collaboration. across genres. So I'm sure you've worked with many different kinds of artists, many different kinds of musical genres, and I'd love, and I think our listeners would really appreciate to hear, what it is that you're thinking about when you're stepping into a project that involves different musical genres, what kinds of things you navigate, and just how you approach collaboration.
Well, thank you so much, Rina. And I'm just so happy to be here. Like you said, this is just a wonderful project that I feel really privileged to be a part of. And I want to thank the Page Theater as well for making this virtual event and this virtual residency possible, because, of course, we're all disappointed that we aren't actually performing it live, but it's great to get a chance to share it with people this way. So yeah, well, that's a huge question about collaboration. And yeah, I mean, it's as was mentioned, I come from a jazz background, and I'm an American musician. I live in New York City, and I work primarily as a jazz musician, although I have a background in classical music too, Western classical, and play in other styles as well. And then to get a chance to work with these musicians from India who are masters of Hindustani music is just amazing. I have to be honest, it's not really a style of music that I had much experience at all with before. I had spent some time in India teaching at a school there and on a couple of other trips, but I was mostly in South India. So the music that I was exposed to was mostly South Indian Carnatic music. So my experience with North Indian music was really limited. And I have to say, it's such a huge, humongous, vast universe of music, as I'm sure everybody who is watching this knows, that I still feel like we're just barely scratching the surface of it as jazz musicians to kind of get invited into this world and get a chance to do a collaboration like this. But the first part of the answer, I think, is just that. It's just understanding just the vastness of the tradition and the complexity and the level of rhythmic development, melodic development, the interaction with the dancers, just how nuanced that is. And so to just respect, first of all, the depth of the tradition, I think, is I would say the primary thing. And one thing that's amazing about this show is that respect is going both ways. And so as jazz musicians, we also have this very deep, not necessarily as old tradition, but it has roots that are very old, and it has a lot of complexity as well. Of course, rhythmically in a different way, but melodically, harmonically, there's so much going on in it that even Americans don't necessarily always know that much about, even though it's America's classical music, as they say. And so to feel that respect as well coming in the other direction, and really just that both sides really understand this isn't something you can just sort of put yourself in a situation where you imitate the sound of the other tradition. You really have to respect the depth of it, and maybe even find other ways of communicating that aren't necessarily so literal. I mean, sometimes we are literally teaching each other pieces of music, or transcribing a rhythm and learning it from one to the other. But other times it's more conceptual things like, okay, well, how do we interact rhythmically with the dancers? How do we do call and response? How can we find a way to bring elements that are similar from each tradition into one piece, rather than necessarily trying to mimic each other more superficially? So I would say that's the beginning of the answer. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We're starting to kind of touch upon some of the things I wanted to talk about later in the conversation, so I'm going to just jump in. I'm really curious to hear, and we've had conversations before, but what are the things, where is it that you and the Indian classical music tradition can really meet? Like, where is the common ground? What is it that allows you to actually come to the table and have the conversation? And where are some of the places that, there are really distinct differences and you have to kind of translate and explain? And I'm sure our audiences would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I think two of the things that are really central in jazz, and as far as I can tell, in Indian classical music, are, first of all, the idea of a structure that allows for improvisation at some point in the structure, and that there's a, kind of a melody, and then some development of that idea, and then a point where there's a conversation either between the musicians and each other, or between the musicians and dancers. That's something that, of course, improvisation is so central to jazz and to tap. And tap and jazz are really come from they're really one style, one part of one tradition that in some ways has kind of separated over the years, but amazingly is, really coming back together again. It seems right now there's a lot more, kind of, from what I can tell, a lot more collaboration and kind of that reemergence of the idea that they're one tradition. So that's something that I think is in common between the Western and Indian side of this project, is that the improvisation, the fun of playing, of making something up and having the other person respond to it. That's one. And then the other one is just the importance of rhythm. I would say that the rhythmic kind of study and facility with rhythm. And that's something that I think jazz musicians are always fascinated with Hindustani music in order to study that aspect of it, the rhythmic aspect, because it's just so developed and it's so virtuosic. And I think we also, rhythm is so important to us, but in some ways is not necessarily as mathematically kind of understood by jazz musicians. And so we are always amazed at, like, how can you play or dance or play in a cycle of 9.5 beats, let's say. Like, for us, that's very difficult to think about, but we love to think about rhythm and to learn about it. So that's an area that we definitely have in common, I would say.
Yeah. That's great. And then where, as you were working with the musicians, where did you find that there were really distinct things that were different and approaches that were different, and where you might have had to really learn something or translate something? Where do you think the two art forms are quite distinct?
Well, I think one very obvious answer to that is we both value rhythm very much, but we think of it in a totally different way. We conceptualize it differently. And so even just figuring out things like, when we were all together, putting together parts of the finale, let's say, there's a section where we're trading a certain length of time where someone will dance and then some musicians will play, and then another dancer will go, and then the musicians. And so, I can tell you're sort of, where I'm going with this, which is that just for us to figure out how long like each trade was going to be, and then when we cut them in half, and then we'll cut those in half, and kind of get faster and faster in our trading. Just that, like, figuring out how to call a cycle. Is it 4 times? Is it 8 times? It's been so confusing sometimes for us, because just what we consider one beat, like how we count one beat, is different between the two traditions. And so it's always hilarious to say, no, we do that 8 times. No, it's 4 times. So, well, really, it's like 2 times if you're counting in the big cycle, so that's just that conceptualization. And much of jazz is in 4/4, what we would consider common time, and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. That's, to us, feels like the default, but it's not necessarily the default, right, for Hindustani music. So even just how do we feel the music? How do we count the music? And also, how do we feel the rhythm, what we call in jazz the time feel, which is whether you're playing in a way that is pushing the music almost ahead, like you're almost rushing, or whether what we do in jazz a lot is we lay back on the beat. So we play, if the metronome is here, 3, 4, we might kind of go 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3. So we're a little behind the beat, and that gives it kind of this relaxed feeling, this swing feeling that we love in jazz. But if we're coming together and one side of the stage is like used to feeling really far behind the beat, and another side of the stage is used to pushing really far forward, then there's that tension of, and especially doing something like trading, where it's like, if somebody starts an idea, they don't start on beat 1. Let's say they start on beat 2, But if they're feeling the beat totally differently than I am, then I might interpret what they just did as beat 3 rather than beat 2. Like, hopefully this isn't getting too technical, but so the time feel itself, and you know, everyone, there are examples of different time feels between music from around the world, you know, that you can, if you want to check out kind of what I'm talking about, listen to the difference between the way, let's say, you know, samba, Brazilian samba might feel, where you might feel really pushing forward all the time, versus reggae, where you might feel like everything's kind of really relaxed, laying behind the beat a lot of the time, just for an example of those.
Yeah, we've definitely had a lot of comical moments on the stage and off the stage. Where's the one? Where's the one? Yeah. And, you know, one of the things actually that I was thinking about, and we talk about this a lot when the dancers talk a little bit about how tap and kathak can come together, that I think is really beautiful. And it was when you were speaking about the improvisational nature of both jazz and Hindustani classical music. And I think it's so interesting because in some ways, because the art forms are improvisation based, there is an openness that's built in and that's inherent. You know, I think even when Hindustani musicians or kathak dancers are not collaborating, because you're improvising, you have to have a real open mind, even within your own tradition, whether I'm working with another kathak dancer or a tabla artist, they're going to throw any idea. So I think for me, what a testament to these two traditions, you know, that have these 4 traditions really that just have this openness, you know, built into them. So yeah, I think it's wonderful. And I think one of the things also that you touched on before was just how something like a 9.5 is quite foreign. And, you know, we have this beautiful piece of music that you and Jayanta created. It's, you know, it's just timeless. And I remember actually the very first time I remember how the piece came about, because for those listeners that have not seen the show, the entire show opens with a duet with myself and Michelle in a 9.5 beat time signature. And I think I had been working with Jayanta Banerjee over the weekend, and Carmen had yet to arrive. And we had a whole thing set in the 9.5 music. It was ready to go. You know, we had choreographed everything. We were really happy with it, confident. And I think this was like on the Sunday or Monday before the Friday opening. And Carmen joined us, I think, Monday evening. And Tuesday morning, you both got together, and I don't even know how the music piece came to be, but all of a sudden there was this beautiful music in 9.5, and it was so beautiful that there was no way we were going to go back to the other 9.5. It was so beautiful. So Tuesday evening, we're like, I guess we have to throw out that whole other thing and re-choreograph and reset. But it was this like magical thing that you all just created. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, you know, what that was like stepping into the studio, making this beautiful piece of music. And also, you know, if you could, I know you're sitting with the piano, but if you could demonstrate a little bit how you approach a 9.5, that would be, I think, great.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just have to say my memory of how it worked was that basically Jayanta wrote the whole thing. Like, that's kind of how I remember it, that he came and said to me, okay, so here's this piece that I want to show you, this new idea for the 9.5. And that he basically just played it, and I tried to learn it, and then he showed me the chords that he was hearing over it. That's how I remember it anyway. Yeah.
I think he was very inspired because you were in the room. So what happened is he had thought about the 9.5 in one way, but then he had the piano and you in the room, and I think it just inspired him in a completely different direction.
Well, it's interesting because the music is actually very, I mean, I know it's in a traditional raga, right? It's got a traditional scale from Hindustani classical music, but it actually has a lot in common with a blues feeling, like a blues scale that we would use in jazz. And the more we've played this piece, the more it has kind of referenced that a little bit, or kind of leaned into that at different points, which is really fun because that's another point of similarity, right? Where we have these notes that make us feel a certain way, I guess you could say. And I just wanted to say one more thing about that process is that another thing we may not have made clear is that all of these traditions rely on learning by ear. That's a huge part about jazz. That's maybe the defining thing about jazz, and could be argued, is that it's an oral and an aural tradition. So we're learning it by ear. We're listening to something, trying to sing it back, and then trying to play it on our instrument. And that's what this whole process has been about. It's been learning things by ear. Now, that said, both of us, both Jayanta and myself, have ways that we've notated things so that we'll remember them, because there's a lot of music in the show. And also because you never know if, you want to have, like, let's say you can't make a show sometime and you need to have someone step in. Mm-hmm. You've got to have it written down, because learning all this music by ear for someone new would be probably impossible. So at least for the jazz side of it. So we have everything notated as well. And that's also how we keep track of changes. But the fact that it's learned by ear rather than written out like in a score, like the composer writes the score and tells everyone what they're going to play, and then they read that music and memorize it. I think that really is an important piece of what you're saying about the openness and the flexibility, and also the sort of, in a way, kind of personal intimacy, or like the personal connection that is generated or that's experienced while we're learning this music from each other. Because it's not like we all just get a piece of paper from one person that says, here's the music, this is what you play. It's like we're teaching each other as we go, and learning and kind of interpreting it as we go, and then that's getting incorporated into the arrangement. And so it's very much this collaborative process of even just learning and creating the music. Mm-hmm. And it's also very embodied for jazz musicians. We always want to think about like how the music, and this is true for, of course, Western classical musicians too, for all musicians, but working with dancers in particular really highlights how this is something that we really feel with our whole bodies. We're not just kind of playing with our hands, looking at the music. But anyway, back to your question about the 9.5. Yeah, so the way that I had it kind of written and conceptualized for a long time was basically as what I understood to be the count that you all were thinking about with it, which was like a kind of a slow 1, 2, 3. Is that right? 4. No, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 1. So there's like an extra half a beat there, an extra eighth note. So I had it written out originally as being, I think, 2 measures of 4/4, and then 1 measure of 3/8. So it would be how many? 19 eighth notes, basically, divided into 4/4. But then just recently, after we did our last show in Hawaii, I remember thinking, I wonder if it would be easier to just write this all out in a different meter so that we can count that half beat as a quarter note. And part of the reason I did that was that there's a drum part that I wanted to actually write down, because we were going to have a sub drummer, and I wanted that to be really clear. So I had our drummer who played in Hawaii, Austin McMahon, write down for me what that drum part that he was playing, there were all these sections, rhythmic sections, recitations, and other trading parts with the dance that I wanted to notate, and I didn't want to write them as 30-second notes. So I wrote them as 16th notes, and I doubled all the values of all the beats. This is getting super technical. I'm sorry for people who aren't musicians, but I think we have examples of those 2 pieces. I think the first and second images that we have would show those different. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I can play this for people to hear. This is the first way I had it written. So it's a measure of 3/4. Oh, that's what we did. Yeah. Oh no. Okay. So this is the double value. This is the new version of it. Is instead of a measure of 3/8, it's now 3/4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So you can see that if you count the whole number of beats in the entire cycle, it's 19 beats because 4 times 4 is 16 plus the 3 is 19. And then we divide that up. If you look a little bit farther down in the page at B, there's the beginning of the rhythmic composition that the dancers and the drummer, that everyone is doing. And so I've got those accents written there. It's a little hard to read them. You basically would still need to learn this by ear, really. But at least it's there sort of as a reminder of what it is. So that gives you an example of sort of what it looks like from the Western notation side for us.
And I think we actually have, even though we still haven't been, we're still working on getting Jayanta Banerjee in, but I believe we actually have the notes the way he writes them. So just in case people are interested. I believe we had to have him. Teresa, do you add him if we're ready? Aha.
Yeah, there he is.
Yes.
Yay.
Hi. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Hello.
How are you?
We're so happy to have you join us, Jayanta. We were just talking. Finally. We were just talking about your favorite 9.5 piece.
Oh.
And Carmen was actually just telling everybody how she counts in 9.5. And how she, because in jazz, they don't necessarily work with 9.5 very much. So Jayanta, I thought maybe we can just take a step back from the 9.5. And Jayanta, I would love to hear you talk about when you're working with jazz, the ways in which, you approach the collaboration. You're working with a tradition that's different from yours. It's not Indian classical. You're stepping outside of your realm. Just, what it's been like for you, and how you think about working with jazz and working with Carmen. I think we'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Actually, I influenced from your Guruji.
Yeah, and you can Jayanta, that if you want, you can speak in Hindi and I can translate. It's up to you.
Yeah, he always pushed me. He used to say that bhero means join.
Mm-hmm.
Just play something, play a little bit, whatever. You just play with the jazz musician. You just listen up, सुनो उनका पियानो सुनो और उनका साथ ब्लेंडिंग करो. तो करते करते मतलब वो बजाते I just tried always with piano, with then finally एक मतलब knowledge आ गया jazz music के साथ कैसे काम कर, कैसे पूरा Indian classical music.
Great. And so for the audiences that, Jayanta went into a little bit of Hindi, and I just want to let the audiences know that actually Jayanta Banerjee has been working with my Guruji, Pandit Chitresh Das, since 2005. Right, Jayanta?
Yeah, 2005 from USA first IJS, India Jazz Suite.
Yes.
But I play 2002 actually first BBC recording. I
see. So he's been actually one of his first big productions with Guruji was India Jazz Suites, which was a kathak and tap collaboration. So, and Jayanta played for that collaboration for 10 years. So he's had a lot of experience working with a range of jazz musicians. And what he was referencing is, what he was saying is that, that basically our Guruji just encouraged him to just join, to just blend. And it just organically kind of gave him kind of a sense of how to work with the jazz musicians. And Jayanta, I would love to hear, in creating the speak music, right? How did you think about creating the speak music? I was telling everybody the 9.5 story that, पहले 9.5 का हमने एक तरफ सोचा था. फिर जब कार्मेन आई, आपने एकदम आपका सोच एकदम कहाँ से कहाँ चला गया or from nowhere, from somewhere, from the divine, this beautiful 9.5 music came. And also the Kirwani piece that Dormisha and Michelle danced to, you've also composed that, the entire finale music, and then also the pre-finale music that just the musicians play. So how did you create all this music? How did you compose all the music?
Listen, for dancer, for music, for dance, it's very very essential. मतलब वो जो डांसर्स का स्टाइल क्या है वो देखना बहुत मुश्किल, बहुत मतलब एसेंशियल है. आपका गुरुजी ऑलवेज बोलते थे, दादा वाज ऑलवेज से 4 चीज है 10 मिनट, मतलब पूरा गाना बजाना में तैयारी, खूबसूरती, तैयारी, लयकारी, खूबसूरती, नजाकत. तो अलग अलग डांसर में अलग अलग चीज होता है. किसी का तैयारी ज्यादा होता है, जैसे दादाजी का तैयारी बहुत ज्यादा था. तैयारी पसंद था दादा का, जो मतलब पहला दादा का ये था. तो ऐसे ये प्रोडक्शन आपका है, आपका डांस में एक ब्यूटी है. आपका तैयारी तो है, जैसे मेरा आई आल्सो लाइक मेलोडी. मुझे तैयारी तो पसंद है, डेफिनेटली तैयारी, झाला, ये तो सब है, पार्ट अंग है. बट मतलब एक एक जन का एक मतलब ह्यूमन कैरेक्टर वाइज और जो भी है, मतलब एक जन का एक चीज स्पेशलिटी होता है. तो आपका है एक ब्यूटी, आपका डांस में एक बहुत एक सॉफ्ट चीज है, एक ब्यूटी है. रचना का भी ये वो है. तो मैंने ये सोचा कि इसमें चलो इसमें थोड़ा मेलोडी ओरिएंटेड करते हैं. तो मैंने राग चूज किया किरवानी. किरवानी इज वेरी सॉफ्ट, वेरी मेलोडियस राग. तो और उसमें एक अच्छा बस मेलोडी निकल गया.
Very nice. Yeah.
जो जिसके साथ ब्लेंडिंग करना है, मतलब जैज का साथ ब्लेंडिंग करना, तो जैजी फील रहना चाहिए म्यूजिक में. तो इसके लिए तो वो नॉलेजेबल पर्सन होना चाहिए, नॉलेज होना चाहिए म्यूजिक में, राग का नॉलेज और वर्ल्ड म्यूजिक का नॉलेज, जैसे जैज, ब्लूज, जो फ्लेमिंको, ये सब जो मतलब वैरायटी, सिम्फोनी. तो मेरा इसमें बहुत इंटरेस्ट है. क्लासिकल म्यूजिक तो है ही, बट क्लासिकल म्यूजिक के बाहर ये सब म्यूजिक में मेरा थोड़ा इंटरेस्ट है. तो इसके लिए मैं तो उन लोग को, मतलब कार्मिन के साथ भी मैंने बहुत रिसर्च किया, क्या कॉर्ड बजा सकता है. दूसरा कॉर्ड तो सी माइनर, डी माइनर, सी शार्प मेजर, सी शार्प माइनर, ये तो नॉर्मल कॉर्ड है. बट इसका अलग से क्या कॉर्ड बज सकता है, कार्मिन मैंने एक्सपेरिमेंट करके, मतलब.
Yeah, I'm going to just translate, Jayanta, that a little bit for the audience. So, one of the things that he was saying is that, again, what he's learned from our, in playing with dance, that you have to really, really think about the character and the personality of the dancer that you're playing with. So what he's saying is that the 9.5 piece, he was really he created it based on the context, and the context was that I was one of the ones dancing it. So he very graciously said that, because I tend to have a softer quality and a particular quality, that 9.5 was informed by my personality, and by also the fact that he was going to be collaborating with jazz. So he took both of those kind of ingredients and feelings to come up with this music. And the second thing that he was referencing is also that, he has a real interest in other musical traditions and in researching and learning about other musical traditions. So the kinds of chords that jazz musicians use. So again, I think, like Carmen said, some of the learning is something really, really that he enjoys. And so I think it would be great to bring Carmen back. And Jayanta, if you could maybe get closer to the microphone, that would be great.
Okay,
Yeah, so we could hear you. And I want to make sure that we get to hear both the instruments a little bit, but I would love to hear from both of you about how you communicate and how you, and the reason I ask, because personally, for the audience, my favorite thing to do is to watch the two of them compose music, because they never say a single word to one another. Carmen never looks up from her piano. Jayanta never looks up from his sitar. And you can see this phenomenal musical communication happening, and they just somehow know. They know what the other person wants. Every now and then Jayanta will look up and say yes. And so I just would love, how do you communicate? I would love to have that kind of communication with people. How do you have such a depth of understanding and sensitivity to one another? How?
Well, first of all, thank you, Rita. That's a very, that's high praise in a way. Also, Jayanta, it's so good to see you. I have to say, I haven't actually said hello to you yet, so
Yes.
It's really great to see you. And Jayanta is such a sensitive musician. He's so,
you also.
well, thank you.
Carmen, when I first I saw you first, then मतलब एक सेकंड में पता चल गया ये artist, this is very sensitive artist and this is very melodious, and you're
thank you.
amazing.
Thank you. Well,
yeah,
I think that that mutual respect, I guess, that we have for each other, and also the being able to listen carefully to what the other person is doing and their phrasing. Jayanta has such beautiful phrasing. I hope we'll get to hear him play solo a little bit, so that everyone can hear just the care he puts into the dynamics and how he shapes a melody. I think that's, he just says so much just through his playing, that in a way, all we have to do is just listen and try to kind of focus in on that to be able to work together, really. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good chance for us, Jayanta. Maybe we could hear some of the Kirvani and the 9.5 that you've composed. Do you mind playing a little bit for our audience, Jayanta?
I'm trying. I'm just trying to play only that piece.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it's making me actually, this conversation is making me feel so sad that we're not together, because the music in the same room is just, oh, I can't wait till we can all be in the same room together. Carmen, I would love to hear, maybe, I know you touched on the 9.5, but since Jayanta just played, I thought it might be really interesting for our listeners to hear you play the same thing,
Sure.
in whatever way you want to play.
Yeah, I'll play how I'm going to pick up on those bluesy aspects of it and show what I mean. I'll try to show the keys a little bit. Let's see. Yeah.
It's so
Hopefully people
wonderful
can.
to hear. Yeah, it was great. It's coming in and out, but that's okay. It was great. We got it. We got a gist of it. I wanted to, if folks have questions, we'll take them. But I wanted to ask a final question, which is that both of you work with dance quite a bit. And in my experience, it's a very rare musician who enjoys working with dance and who really is phenomenal at it. I think in some ways it's a very specific skill set. And then also when you're working with really large productions like this, the rehearsal demands are really intense. The dancers are always asking for more and more and more rehearsals. And so I would love to hear from both of you why you work with dance, and what is it about working with dance that you find important, to do as for yourself, and what are some of the things that you enjoy about it? Should we start maybe with Carmen and then Jayanta that?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's true that not every musician works with dancers, but I don't know. For me, it's, well, first of all, I think of music, I feel music in a very physical way, kind of in a very visceral, embodied way. And it's always been part of my relationship to the music. I think I've always wanted to play music that really grooved, that really made you feel like dancing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been interested in Afro-Cuban music, and partly for that reason, and other kinds of dance music traditions from around the world. And so that's one. And then I think another part is just that it's a challenge for us, and it forces us to get outside of our comfort zone. And some of the things that we value, like especially as a jazz musician, often the assumed kind of most important thing thing that gets focused on or talked about the most is improvising melodies, sort of like playing lines, improvising lines, and which is of course important and great and fascinating. But to me, even more important than that is just the feel, is like how the music feels. And that's like, to me, one of the most basic things that matters about music. And so working with dancers, it's like, I could try to play as many cool lines or, you know, chord substitutions or all my jazz tricks or whatever that I know. But if it doesn't work well with what you're doing, if it doesn't respond, like Jayanta was saying, if it doesn't help to support the personality and the expression of the dancer, then it doesn't really work. It's not really doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I learned so much from working with all of you amazing dancers. It's a really an honor and a challenge.
Thank you. जयंत दा, आप
Yes.
थोड़ा बताएंगे डांस के साथ, you know, क्यों आप काम करते हो, आपको कैसा लगता है?
When I playing my sitar, when I play my sitar, that time always I feeling, and I try to close my eyes and just I play and I enjoy from my heart, from inside. But when I accompany with you with dance, so that time I can feel my playing my music, and I can see that music expression from you. So that time I enjoy both. What is expression? That is why I always enjoy this piece from stage, from both of you and Rachna and other dancer Dormisha and Misail. जब सबका साथ मतलब वो एक्सप्रेशन देख के वो बहुत अच्छा लगता है. और also musician, also Carmen, when Carmen playing that with that mood, वो सब देखने में बहुत अच्छा वो एक आनंद आता है. वो डांस का एक्कम्पनीमेंट में वो एक अलग मजा है.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So it's a little bit like you get to see how your music is expressed in another form and reflected back to you in another manifestation. That's wonderful. And I think
And especially गद भाव पोर्शन जहाँ पे मतलब छेड़छाड़ जो गुरुजी का साथ, जैसे शकुंतला दुश्मन और जो भी है, बहुत सारे गद भाव है, द्रौपदी है और सीताहरण. तो इसमें एक्साइटिंग बहुत पार्ट होता है. मतलब कुछ भी मतलब इम्प्रोवाइजेशन, सो मेनी इम्प्रोवाइजेशन दादा के साथ जो भी है, मतलब स्टेज में जो जैसे हम लोग का होते हैं, लॉट ऑफ इम्प्रोवाइज you have to play. मतलब वो स्टेज में ही होता है, वो स्टेज में ही बनता है. तो उसका एक्सप्रेशन मतलब दूसरा से मतलब कैसे उसका वाइब्रेशन है, उसका आनंद एक अलग है. और दैट इज वेरी रिस्की पार्ट. मतलब मैं क्या बनाऊं वो तो कोई मतलब पहले से कुछ सोच एक बेसिक एक टुकड़ा होता है, देन you have to improvise.
Yeah, so for the audience, Jayanta is actually speaking about what it's like to especially accompany storytelling aspect of kathak, and how it's very risky for him because you have a musical phrase that, depending on where the story goes and what the dancer expresses, everything is made up and created on the spot based on the expression coming back to him. So it's, I think, again, that riskiness and the challenge that's very exciting. And I believe we just have a few more minutes, and we have a question for Carmen. And that question, that is my father, actually, Rina Mehta. He's asking, how is it that you work with the different tabla rhythms, you know, the rhythms that the tabla produces?
Hey. Hello, Dinesh, sir. Good to see you. I'm here. Well, that's a great question. I would say it is humbling. It's very humbling for me as someone who, you know, studies rhythm, but not to that extent. And it is I have to listen very closely, and I've had to, you know, we've had a chance to learn a little bit about the syllables and how they work, and how the rhythms are expressed vocally as well. And so just I guess trusting that even if it sounds like something is starting in a different place in the measure than we expect, or, you know, things feel like we don't understand them rhythmically, that Satya Prakash, the tabla player on this show, is amazing, and he always knows where the beat is, and so it's a matter of, you know, trusting and letting go of that need to always kind of know or count exactly, and just know, like, okay, where he's going to land in the right place. And so that actually leads to me playing different things than I would otherwise. And it opens me up in my improvisation rhythmically, which is really fun. So yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, and I really wish I could keep going, but I know we all of the musicians are quite busy with all kinds of online classes, and it's very late for Jayanta in India. So unfortunately, I'm going to actually wrap up the conversation here. We're very happy that we had this chance to talk to you both. And I do just want to say one thing, which is that when Rachna and I, there is something like serendipity and grace in this world, and we could not have been blessed to work with more phenomenal musicians. So this show was an idea, but it's really all the individual artists, Michelle and Dormisha, that stepped in with their incredible knowledge, and all of the musicians. And Jayanta and Carmen, it's such a gift for us to be able to work with you, and you give so much to us that allows our dance to move forward and to grow. So we're really very grateful to have you on this project, and we can't wait to be in the same room listening to your beautiful music. And thank you for doing this so much. Thank you very much. Namaskar. And I think Theresa is going to come back and share some information with our audiences.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Jayanta. So nice to see you. Thank you both. All three of you so much for sharing with us today. This was just fascinating and wonderful. I just want to share with everyone, if you're interested in learning more about any of these artists' wonderful work, you can find Carmen's details here at carmenstaaf.com. You'll be able to find more about her. You can also follow Jayanta at Jayanta Sitar. And you can learn more about Rina's work at Leela Dance Collective and at rinamehta.dance. Thank you once again so much for joining us. Caitlin's posting right now our survey link, and we would really appreciate your feedback and comments. Please continue to join us for the rest of our events. We go through May 1st, culminating in a wonderful virtual performance of Speak. And next up, Monday, we have a talk about the Guru Shishya Parampara, which is the learning methods for how the music and teaching methods for music and dance in Indian classical art. So please join us for that. Find more information again at pagetheater.org or at facebook.com/pagetheater. And thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.